everybody. How are you? It's nice to be back in Portland. You know, I'm traveling every time to US for a conference, and I think this is the best city I've been so far. I'm sorry if anybody's from California. Um, Actually, I started recognizing some of the streets. The weather kind of surprised me this year, but I think it's all right. So this is the talk you've been waiting for. This is the CLI 101, the ultimate CLI talk that you've been waiting for about the past, the present, and the future, including a lot of undocumented stuff. Actually, that's everything pretty much. So I want you to come back from Chain React to your colleagues and tell them, you know, I now mastered the React Native tooling. Hell yeah. So let's get started. We'll see how that goes. So a couple of words about me. I'm a core contributor to React Native. I'm on a React Native team. I'm helping them with the releases. And I'm also working on the CLI. I'm also co-founder and CTO at CallStack. This is a company we founded that does React and React Native. We help companies around the world ship React products. And we also help you in the open source community via the contributions that we make. And as they said, I'm also a petrol head. I got a car and I'm racing. And something I'm really proud of, I just got my degree after 7 years, so that's really amazing. Yeah. Amazing. I use this applause to adjust that. All right. So let me start with a story that happened to me a while back ago. I evangelize a lot. That's me on the picture, by the way. It's pretty cool. I travel to many conferences, especially where native developers are hanging out. I do like converting them to JavaScript, which for some reason they don't like. And you know, usually nobody cares. They just move on. But on the last conference in Prague, somebody did show up. And I asked him, like, how does it feel to develop React Native for you coming from the iOS background? And what he told me was that I just don't think it's stable enough. And I'm like, oh no, again, this kind of discussions happening over and over. I know React Native is not 1.x yet. Who cares? So I asked him to elaborate on that a bit more. And what he told me is that he had few issues, including, you know, the linking of a dependency. The built-in command didn't work for him reliably. And being an iOS developer, he also had no idea what that really was. And obviously, as soon as they launched, they got a red screen with some stack trace. They tried to debug it. It took them a while. And in the meantime, when a new React Native version got released, they wanted to upgrade. And they spent quite some doing that. And then they realized they also need to upgrade some of their other dependencies. So eventually, they just didn't releasing the app-assist, and they didn't hop on the latest cycle. And please raise your hand if this sounds like your getting started experience. See? I can say that this sounds pretty much like my getting started experience. I started when React Native was 0.5 or 6, and that was quite an experience. And as a result, you know, I think we've learned how to deal with these things over time by either not writing code that we knew was expected to break, or by not using the libraries that we knew were not going to work. We subconsciously started making decisions that we've learned were guaranteed to get us there. But nobody said that that way was the most efficient one. So let's now take a look at the CLI. It's a bunch of useful commands and functionalities. It's beautiful, right? I mean, when I'm showing this to my girlfriend, she's like, I have no idea why you like this. But for us engineers, I feel like the tooling is kind of something that makes us really happy. But the CLI has a problem. It's a kitchen sink of different features, and they are all 80% done. And now I completely made up this number, but here's the thing. It requires some effort to get to that premium level of polish that provides comprehensive and reliable experience for React Native. Just look at the output on screen. It actually provides a lot of useful information. It's just that the first time you see it, you're like, what's going on? And if only, you know, there was some documentation to guide us through this process. And here's the thing, and I'm speaking for me and my friends from the React Native community, are biased. You know, we've been into many issues with React Native over time, and we've learned how to mitigate them. For example, I know that many of my friends are not using React Native Link, but they are linking libraries manually. However, React Native Link is still the recommended way of doing that. So it's a bit unfair, and at the other side, it also makes the command itself untrustworthy because it doesn't work reliably for everybody to use it. And also, it brings me to my next point, which is, people are whispering like, there is this kid on the block that's been, hitting with the marketing just right into the shortcomings of React Native, like, hey, we got great docs, we got great UI kit, like everything's so great about us. So you start thinking that if the tools they have are great and the UI kit they have is great, then the framework itself must be fast, performant, and ready to use for me, right? Now at this point, after spreading this apocalyptic state of the tooling and even showing the forbidden frameworks here, let me make one thing extremely clear. We are all good. This is already happening, and actually that's what I'll be talking about today in my talk. So a few months ago, we have moved out the CLI to the new home under the lean core effort. And while doing that, we have quickly learned that there is a bunch of issues that need to be fixed as soon as possible, from really trivial mistakes, such as mixed up license headers throughout the code, through more severe ones, such as the insanely long startup time, or maybe this security header from GitHub, which I've just learned about like a few months ago. So me, Team Mikey, and SMSec, my friends of ColdStack and React Native community members, felt like it was our responsibility to quickly step up and make the CLI usable and great again. And in fact, we have already tried that in the past with our own tool called Hall, which was an alternative to Metro for bundling React Native apps with Webpack. So we were prepared to face that. We knew what does it mean to actually start working on the CLI. We've run through this. So today, I want to highlight some of the areas that we have focused while working on the V2 of the CLI in no particular order. I believe these are the key traits that define the command line tool and guarantee the ultimate developer experience. And see, I'm using ultimate all over. That's probably because of BMW. If you know, they have the ultimate driving experience, so I'm kind of petrol head inside out. All right. So if you're like me, if you first look at the appearance of the tool, you kind of start judging the quality of it. You see a nice tool, nice login, you think, this is right, I want to use it. Unfortunately, the CLI didn't do well in that regard in the past. You would get a whole different experience depending on the command you were interacting with and the developer who actually made it. So there would be some commands having a really nice output and a lot of information, and some commands having literally nothing at all. For example, the CF bundle identifier error, one of the most popular issues here, has been a result of a poor error handling experience, nothing more than that. So the fix was really easy and involved just kind of returning early from a function as soon as the error happened. Otherwise, we were trying to parse an iOS project that wasn't compiled, and so the error was happening, swallowing the real reason. Now, I know that these error messages don't look nice, and the error is not really, like the color is really hard to see, but this was in the middle of our work on this feature. We did it like a while back ago, so it was impossible for me to do this screenshot one more time. However, it kind of proves the point. You can see the error messages much better. Maybe you can read it, maybe not, but at least you get the real error message instead of the CF bundle identifier. So while working on it, we have also enrolled our own logger. We use it across the CLI to generate the same output regardless of the command, so it looks like a unified end product. And it's a part of the public interface of the CLI. So if you are ever going to work on the CLI or commands, feel free to use that to kind of jump straight onto the look and feel that we have and we are building for the CLI. We have also reworked the error handling with better error messages and stack traces. And we have also added verbose mode. And I think this is huge. If this screenshot doesn't make you convinced, don't worry. I got a bunch of other videos to kind of show how it works in production. But I think it's really nice, because now I look at the CLI and I'm like, OK, I got an error. I know how to fix it. Or at least I know where to look for it. Another thing is the documentation. Like, it's crucial. Your tool could be the best in the world, could have a lot of great features, but there's little value that your users will have if they are not documented at all. And this has been the case with the CLI for a really long time. Many of the features, like the ones on screen, were not documented at all. They were only known to a very small number of developers that had enough time to dig through the code and learn about them the hard way. like monorepo support or disabling linking. When I was browsing the internet, I was finding a lot of questions like that, and I was repeating the same answer all over, but we never had a proper place to describe these in a sort of guide section. And there were also a few tutorials available online, and now I'm really happy that the community is stepping up and kind of making these materials for us. However, I don't think they should be the recommended source for learning about the fundamental features of the CLI and React Native. There should be a place for that. So we decided to take documentation seriously. Having a well-documented set of features and ideas can be really useful to better understand the CLI and be able to use it efficiently. And it's also kind of handy for contributing, so it's a nice side effect that we made it, and now we can ask you for your help, and so you now at least know how to even fork the project, because that wasn't really obvious in the past. So that's why the CLI has a new documentation for everything, like literally everything. Most importantly, we have described the notion of a platform, plugin, project, and a dependency, things that used to confuse even me a while back ago. And I'd like to use this slide as an opportunity to say thanks to T. Mikey, my friend who was working with me. If you have ever worked with him in the open source, or if you ever get to work with him in the open source, he is passionate about two things: unit tests and documentation. So that's what we got right in the CLI, like he just couldn't accept a PR without these. So platform is a package that ships with code that allows you to extend React Native with a platform. So think React Native Windows has Windows, React Native has Android and iOS built in. We'll cover that in details a bit in a second. Plugin, for example, on the other hand, this is a package that extends CLI with additional functionality. If you have been using the great tools that InfinityRed is making, they are extending the CLI with some great commands, and that's been always possible. But now it's properly documented and no longer considered private API. Back in the day, you had to reach out to somebody like me, and I would have to tell you, here's how you can do it. Dependency, on the other hand, is a package that contains React Native code to be linked. So it's not a NPM dependency. It's more like a dependency that has native iOS or native Android code that you might be linking in the future. And project, that's nothing but your React Native project. So it contains information about all the platforms, all the dependencies, basically the whole environment that you're working with. And we'll also talk about that in a second. So just listing these down to get us on the same page before we continue. So the performance. It depends pretty much on the way you are interacting with the CLI. Like, for example, if you are running run iOS or start command, the core of the command will take like 99% of the execution time. So any improvements that we do to the CLI itself, you will not even notice. It's going to be fast anyway. I mean, it's going to be slow anyway. However, one of the biggest performance bottlenecks was the performance startup, which was caused by two things. The use of Babel register, and now the reason for that is that the React Native CLI, being part of React Native repo, was kind of following the same architecture and the same setup. And as you know, React Native itself is not transpiled, and dependencies we create are not transpiled as well. Everything happens during runtime. So we were using Babel register to do that during runtime as well on the client side. And we were also processing all node modules dependencies in order to know what native dependencies you have and what we should link. So if you had React Native WebView and other modules in your package JSON, you would have to go through the whole node modules folder and find them. So extracting the CLI out of the React Native lifted a lot of constraints and let us roll a whole new architecture to make that even better. So we ended up changing the publish step and transpiling the code ahead of time. And that makes the code load almost instantly for you without making the CLI experience much more enjoyable. And as a result, we have observed a dramatic performance improvement during the startup, like 2 seconds faster. And then we also shaved the startup time by additional half a second. So from now the startup time takes 0.2 seconds. So that's like instant. So it was very easy to set up, and I'd like to encourage you to do the same for your libraries as well. Right now, we need to transpile them during the runtime, but I'd really love to get us closer to the React ecosystem and just kind of encourage us to do that before we publish the modules. As you can see, the performance improvements are right there. For us, it was more than 2 seconds. So you can now multiply that by the amount of time you open the CLI, and I think it's going to be like 1 day per year, depending on the amount of projects you have. Another thing is the configuration, and that's my favorite part because I messed it up. So it's been implemented in React Native in a really complicated way. So don't worry if the following slides make no sense to you. There are 3 ways to alter the CLI behavior. Like, how many of you have heard of the run CLI config? Please raise your hand. All right. The Metro config. I see the Facebook people raising their hands. That's good. And the rnpm in package JSON. Okay, that's also quite impressive. Anyway, see, like that was probably 10% of the audience. So I think that kind of brings us to the point that these things are not documented properly and are kind of mysterious. So whoever uses them is like, oh wow, you have some hacks in your code base. What are you doing? So I see somebody making photo. Please don't. This is gone. I'll show you the alternative in a second. So first, there was this run CLI config.js. So I have 3 examples of each file, and I'm going to show you how we can use TypeScript because it's cool. So this is how you can integrate TypeScript with the run CLI config. And now here's the confusing part. When I started working with React Native, my first thought was run CLI is for configuring React Native CLI. It's not. It's for Metro. But back in the day when Metro started, it was part of React Native. Metro was the first command. You can think of Metro as the first command of the React Native CLI. So back in the day when the team made the Metro and the config, it was the same thing. So it's just the naming confusion. Then, after they made Metro a standalone project, they created their own configuration mechanism on top of Cosmic config called Metro config.js. That has a slightly different shape. In this case, it's an object. And as you can see, it has less configs than on the before screen, on the previous screen. And then you can still set the mysterious rnpm key in a package JSON to configure different properties about your project and native dependencies that you're working with. And you know, this was meant to be temporary, and I think rnpm is not a thing for like 3 years already, and still we can and we need to configure it sometimes. So I think that's really confusing for you. So the point is things are complex, and that's why we have decided to just drop it all and start from scratch with an entirely new format that would be simple in the first place. And the new configuration is also based on Cosmic config and uses namespaces to combine all the different purposes that different files had to satisfy. For example, if you are developing a native module or a native component, you are going to be most interested in changing settings under the dependency key, because what you are building is a dependency, right? These properties are then used to resolve the final configuration. Now, this is the final configuration of the project, and you can see it today by running React Native config in your project. It's inferred based on many things. So you probably agree with me, and you are thinking that this is rather complex and kind of like has a lot of different settings. So the idea is, I believe that in React Native projects, the files are the convention. Like I can tell a lot about your project just by the files, and I'm not talking about the naming patterns and the structure. I'm more about, you know, like what kind of different files you have. You have native iOS or native Android files. So we are trying to infer as much as we can to lift the requirement from you to set all things up. So we are kind of trying to be more like Expo in that sense that you don't have to mess around with native code too much. And so if we make a mistake, like if we infer something wrong, we can change that pretty easily. For example, let's say you want to disable link in React Native Web View on iOS, like you just don't want it. So all you have to do is just set iOS property to null. Nothing more, and this will be deep merged with the previous config that I showed you. So as a result, you will get an iOS set to null in the final config. Like running React Native link now will skip WebView from being linked on iOS entirely. Just like here, in fact, the CLI will think that it's working with the Android-only library. And apart from that, we also validate your configuration to eliminate mistakes. So if you make a typo like I did with platforms, you will get an information early on that something's not working, and you will be able to go over and fix the mistake. And then start it all over. So we are using Joy to validate the schema. We have the schema defined with types, and it makes it really easy to work with. And now one great thing before I go to this slide, like from the maintenance perspective, is that many of the issues in the React Native repo were like, start command is broken. React Native link is not working properly. And we were asking for reproduction, and it was hard to give it. Now all you have to do is just generate the config output, just paste it in the issue, and I'll know right away what's going wrong. And if not, I can just take this JSON, put it as a fixture to my tests, and see right away what's going on. So last thing is that, as I said in the performance sections, we were eagerly parsing the whole node modules and trying to get the whole dependencies that you have. We have changed that, so now it's lazy. So what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate node modules as soon as you start asking for dependencies. So if you're running star command, log iOS, or whatever, we are not going to do this evaluation at all because you are not going to be accessing that. So the only place where we will be accessing this is inside link, I think, and a few other commands. So let's talk about link. So how many of you have used it at least once in their lives? All right. Cool. So judging by the amount of hands, it's probably one of the most popular commands. I'm pretty sure if we did any kind of tests and evaluated the popularity, this would be one of the most popular commands. However, the point is, when I first implemented this command with my friend Alexei Kurev, we considered it an MVP. Like, we thought it's better to have something than nothing, and we wanted to provide better support in the future. So for example, we parse iOS files using an unmaintained and unstable parser, and the idea was we will write our own in the future, but we never got around that. And I know what you are thinking right now, but I think it's actually good that we haven't done that. Over time, it turned out that the assumptions we had were based on wrong principles. Rather than scripting the platform and trying to write parsers, we should have embraced the platform and used the API's public interface that it had from the very beginning. And that's what the new link is all about. It drops the bad parts about the link and takes the ones that were actually good. So first, it embraces the platform. It uses what community has been already defaulting to when handling native dependencies, cockapods and Gradle. Second, it's fully automatic. As Ram told you, hooking into the platform natively gives us the ability to resolve project dependencies right away when the compilation happens, so you no longer have to run the parser yourself ahead of time. And last, it's platform agnostic by default, so adding support for third-party platform like Windows will be super easy. And now the whole big idea behind Link is that next year, I'm not going to be here talking about Link. We want it to be automatic and happen behind the scenes, so we want this experience to be seamless. On a high level, both platforms require you to include a special line in their respective configuration files. So for example, on iOS, you need to add a Ruby function to your pod file, and on Android, you have to modify some Gradle files. On a low level, they both run React Native config behind the scenes to get the information what to link and how to link it in a cross-platform way. All in all, if React Native is about cross-platform development, I think the CLI should also embrace that paradigm. So I actually would like to thank Expo and the whole team, especially Sebastian Chmiela, Tomasz Sapeta, and Brent, for pioneering this approach. I'm not an expert when it comes to native development, so seeing that such things were possible with their Unity modules actually opened up my eyes and helped us kind of innovate in that aspect as well. And you know, we are working really closely with Expo together, and this is something that I really wanted to explicitly say. Like, many times I open the React Native community group on Facebook. There's a lot of many people asking, you know, like, should I use Expo or not? And there are like comments like, don't use Expo. It's really bad. Like, why would you use Expo and different things? Like, I really don't like it, and I wanted to spread this notion that we are not actually like fighting against each other. We are working all together, and we are working closely with Expo team to not reinvent the wheel all over. And that's why we are taking inspirations from each other and actually working towards making the CLI better experience for both Expo and React Native developers, because you can eject, and soon Expo will be even easier to use for React Native developers. So we want to make the experience the same. So thank you for that. Another thing is the new architecture, and you know, we kind of React Native CLI used to be really tightly coupled with the internals, and so now has a separate repo, so we were able to change the infrastructure. And now I'm bringing this on this talk because I think it influenced a lot of great things that we came up with later. So we have structured it in the monorepo. Like, I love monorepos. The first time I learned that monorepos are what, you know, cool big companies are using, I also wanted to use them. And so when I heard about Linkor, my first thought was like, can I make it a monorepo? And everybody was like, yeah, you can do it. So I did it. And then right away I started splitting the packages into smaller ones, and I was like extremely happy that I'm making it. And you know, we made each of these packages to be responsible for a single thing. So So such architecture, the good thing is that it promotes public interface over private call sites and hard-coded usages. For example, the Android and iOS platforms are now in separate packages and are both a platform and a plugin at the same time. So they contain commands such as run iOS and log iOS and files needed for link. So these are no longer hard-coded in the CLI itself. CLI doesn't know about that at all. And React Native then pulls these packages from the NPM and registers them. I'm going to show you the use in a second. And what's more, it's also easier to contribute and maintain. For example, we can gradually start migrating packages to TypeScript, just like we migrated tools. So this kind of separation of concerns and architecture makes such transitions really smooth. So now let's talk about platform support. How many of you have used any platform rather than Android and iOS? Please raise your hand. Okay. I think, yeah, okay. Cool. So not many, so I'm planning to change that. React Native has been always by learning once and writing everywhere. However, in reality, the support for additional platforms has never been easy. Like, this is something we are working on right now. The framework started as an iOS, and then Android was added in a single commit with others to follow. So both platforms were hard-coded and not following a common public interface because there wasn't a need for such thing. So this made integration really complicated. It required a lot of hacks. So when extracting the CLI, we decided to make all the new features platform-centric by default. So today, platforms are first-class citizens in the CLI, as well, supported throughout the code. And I'm hoping that this will lead to even smoother integration with other platforms and spread React Native on entirely new targets. So first, what we did is we have completely extracted the Android and iOS specific code to separate packages with a public API and some files. And then we have made React Native to behave like an out-of-tree platform itself. That is, it now declares support for Android and iOS just like React Native Windows. So in fact, there is no longer a concept of a out-of-tree platform or external platform or anything like that. All the packages now declare platforms using the same interface. So technically speaking, in the future, you might be using just iOS if there is React Native iOS package, for example. So you could just strip out Android pieces from here, and you would be getting iOS-only development, in case you need it. And last but not one, the upgrading. So I left the best one for the end. So how many of you upgrade apps manually? Right? Would you use the tooling if it was working reliably? See, there you go. So I guess, I kind of knew the answer was going to be hell yeah, because why not, right? So like historically speaking, we had a lot of ways of doing that, including the upgrade and Git upgrade. They were not really well maintained, and they were serving app they were not acting as you would expect. For example, the Git upgrade itself worked by comparing the React Native init project with your project files, generating the Git diff, and then applying that diff onto your files. And so it sounds great by definition, but there were a lot of conflicts over time, and it never kind of lets you upgrade more complex diffs. So that's why we have decided to integrate the rndif purge by default, which is another Git upgrade mechanism that is also part of the React Native community now. And what it does is it generates diffs between two blank React Native projects, and then this diff is applied onto your projects. So the difference is that it's more reliable, and also it's cloud-based, so it allows you and us to check the diffs ahead of time. So here is a screenshot of me trying to upgrade my app to latest React Native to try out Hermes. And as you can see, I got some information, and the diff has been applied, and I see exactly what files were changed. Also, I'm having changes to pod file because I upgraded to 0.60 that has the auto-linking support. Now, the big thing is, if this doesn't work, which is possible, you get this great online upgrade guide tool that will basically let you know what are the differences, and you will be able to check the diff yourself and apply the changes manually. And sure, this is not enough for very, very serious breaking changes, but as React Native is maturing and we are having less of them, this should be enough and even more efficient as we go. So please give it a try if you had tried upgrading with the CLI before and you didn't like it. We'd love to get your feedback and improve that even further. So the last thing I want to mention today, but equally important, is the getting started experience. And this one's amazing. I mean, historically speaking, this has been really rough for React Native developers, for us. So the process involved installing a global command and then running React Native init on top of it. And from the maintenance perspective, this has been extremely hard to set up. And as a result, the command itself lacked the polish you'd expect from the first command you ever run with React Native, because nobody wanted to work on it because it was just so hard to set it up. So the important information was swallowed in a sea of output that was being printed by the sub-processes. So for example, the CLI was installing the NPM dependencies that would take up the whole screen and possibly hide something very important or something that you might be interested in. So we have changed the entire engine to be more interactive and beautiful to look at. Yeah. So the output of sub-processes is no longer printed on screen. Instead, you get a nice loader, and you can follow along each of the steps. As you can see, we have also added the automatic cockuples installation for you, because that's now required starting from 0.60. So it looks professional, on par with how React Native Great is itself. And it's actually one of my goals and goals of my team, that we want the CLI to be the best on the market. So we are tired of people asking if React Native is dead. We now want React Native CLI to be like the top player in the game that everybody's looking like, I want to be like them. And it's also not going to use the global package. So no more upgrading issues, no more issues with running React Native init. We are encouraging to use npx. So feel free to give it a try. So let's talk about the future. Now, our team at Callstack, is and will keep working on the project and governing the development. We are particularly excited about tools. For some reason, we just like them. So we'd like to make React Native experience even better for you. But most importantly, we want you to be productive, feeling right at home and having all the tools you need. And to do so, we need your help. Now that the CLI has been moved out to a React Native community, it's never been easier to contribute, to give us feedback, and help us working. So join us in the open source, and let's make React Native tooling great. Thank you very much.
Give it up. Give it up. Oh, wait, there's another thing. You got something else to say?
Yes, I do.
Wait, let me move out the way.
That's my must-have one more thing that I'm always making. But yeah, thanks for the applause, and I got yourself a bonus for that. So we run a React Native EU conference in Europe in September. The conference happens in Poland. And so I got a discount code for you if you'd like to go. There's going to be a lot of people from Chain React traveling there as well. So feel free to make a photo or just reach out to me, and I'll give you another discount as well. Thank you.
All right. I like that. Good job, man.